during the meeting. Tonight, invocation and pledge will be led by Mrs. Westfall. Please stand.
Heavenly Father, we ask you to bless all the workers who repaired and flushed the lines after the water line breaks. We ask you to protect all those plowing and salting our streets and roads to keep us safe. We ask protection for our first responders who have to deal with weather-related accidents and snowy conditions. Lord, as we come together this evening to discuss and make decisions for our city, we pray for truth, wisdom, and peace in the process. We thank you for a country that allows us to have a voice. Please help us to also listen with understanding and respect, and let us speak with clarity, restraint, and always a spirit of love. In the holy name of Jesus, amen.
Amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mrs. Knight, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Pierce? Mrs. Snee?
Here.
Mr. Whidden?
Here.
Mr. Sievert?
Here.
Mrs. Westphal?
Here.
Mr. Phillips?
Here.
Mrs. Marshall?
Here.
Mr. Schilling?
Present.
Mr. Twiss?
Here.
Motion to excuse Mr. Pierce.
Second.
Motion to excuse Mr. Pierce by Mr. Phillips, second by Mr. Schilling. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Westphal?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Twiss?
Yes.
Mr. Pierce is excused.
Thank you. First thing on our agenda tonight is a public hearing over renewal of farmland and agricultural district. Mrs. Knight, could you please read Resolution R12, 2025?
Resolution number R12, 2025, resolution approving the application of Scherre H. Mumpower for renewal of farmland in an agricultural district.
Anyone wish to speak on behalf of that or against that? Please come forward, give your name and address for the record, and have your comments. Seeing none, the public hearing will be declared closed. Moving on, summary of the minutes of February 3rd. Mrs. Knight, would you please read that?
Minutes of Council, February 3, 2025. The Rumpke Quarterly Reward Program winner was recognized. Committee reports. Buildings and Utilities Committee recommended legislation be prepared authorizing a contract for a backup contract for quicklime for the water plant. Personnel Committee reported regarding some requested appointments, following which Robert Lewis was appointed to the Human Relations Commission, and Donna DeVille and Michael Hammer were appointed to the Troy Reinvestment Area Housing Council. Recreation and Parks Committee recommended legislation be prepared authorizing an amendment to a professional services agreement so that there could be a Parks and Recreation master plan performed. Committee also recommended authorizing the temporary activation of the DORA for Treasure Island concerts this summer. Resolution number R4, 2025, amended agreement with American Structure Point for the feasibility study intersection of West Main with Stanfield Road and Experiment Farm Road, was given second reading and adopted. Resolution number R6, 2025, authorizing bidding for a contract for quicklime for the water plant, was given first reading and adopted. Resolution number R7, 2025, authorizing an amended agreement with American Structure Point to perform the Park and Recreation Master Plan update, was given first reading and adopted. Ordinance number 02, 2025, authorizing Treasure Island non-ticketed use agreements for 2025 events at Treasure Island Park, first reading and adopted. Ordinance number 03, 2025. The designated outdoor refreshment area would be expanded for the concerts for this summer, being June 21, July 4th, and August 2, 2025. It was given first reading, and adopted. Following various comments, council adjourned at 7:31 p.m.
Motion to accept the minutes.
Motion to accept the minutes by Mr. Phillips, seconded by Mr. Whidden. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Westphal?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Minutes are approved.
Thank you. Moving on to committee reports. Law and Ordinance, Mr. Whidden.
Thank you, Mr. President. This committee met February 10th to consider the petition filed for a Type 2 expedited annexation from Concord Township, 57.679 acres, located on Fenner Road at Wilson Road. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared to provide for the 3 legislative items required by state law related to the Smith annexation. To meet the timeline of the state law for an expedited annexation, this committee supports emergency legislation. Respectively submitted by Christy Marshall, William Twist, and myself, Jeffrey Whidden, as chair.
Any questions on that? I believe you have an oral report as well.
I do, Mr. President. The Ohio Division of Liquor Control has transmitted the following notice of liquor permit application to Secate Petroleum, LLC, 959 North Market Street. It's a notice of stock transfer only. The police department has not recommended any objection or hearing be filed. We'd be appreciative of the news. Well, that part is not going to be read, but it's a transfer of a liquor permit.
Any questions on that? Thank you very much. Moving on to Safety and Health. Mr. Twist.
Thank you, Mr. President. This committee met February 10th to discuss proposed agreements related to the Troy Fire Department providing emergency 911 responses to the UVMC campus and accepting a grant to offset the purchase of a Sprinter ambulance to service the UVMC campus. These agreements will not require additional staffing or negatively impact fire department services to other areas. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to enter into an agreement with Premier Health Partners related to the City of Troy Fire Department providing emergency medical services to the UVMC campus, and to enter into a donation agreement with the Upper Valley Medical Center to accept a grant in the amount of $175,000 to offset the purchase of a Sprinter ambulance to provide EMS to the UVMC campus, so that the agreement with the UVMC can be executed as soon as possible to facilitate the emergency medical response. This committee supports emergency legislation. Respectfully submitted by Todd Sievert, Jeffrey Whidden, and myself as chair, William Twist.
Questions? Thank you, sir. Moving on. Citizens' comments on anything we have on the agenda tonight. 2-minute limit. Please come to the podium, name and address for record, and Mr. Kerber will be our timekeeper. All righty. We'll move on to resolutions. Mrs. Knight, will you please read Resolution R8, 2025?
Resolution number R8, 2025. Resolution establishing municipal services for certain territory containing 57.679 acres, more or less, in Concord Township, proposed to be annexed to the city of Troy, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. This is the annexation known as the Smith Annexation, Fenner Road at Wilson Road, first reading.
Move to suspend.
Second.
Move to suspend by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mr. Sievert. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Westphal?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Move to adopt. Second.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Sievert, seconded by Mr. Schilling. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Westphal?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
And Mrs. Westphal?
Yes. I think you're right.
Sorry. Sorry.
That's all right.
Resolution is adopted.
Thank you. Could you please read Resolution R 9, 2025?
Resolution number R9, 2025, resolution establishing buffer requirements for certain territory containing 57679 acres, more or less, in Concord Township, proposed to be annexed to the city of Troy, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. This is also a piece of legislation related to the Smith annexation, Fenner Road at Wilson Road, first reading.
Move to suspend.
Second.
Motion to suspend, Mr. Phillips or Mr. Whidden? Mr. Whidden. Seconded by Mr. Twist. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Move to adopt?
Second.
Move to adopt by Mr. Whidden, second by Mr. Schilling. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, will you please read R 10, 2025?
Resolution number R10, 2025, resolution consenting to the annexation of certain territory containing 57.679 acres, more or less, in Concord Township to the city of Troy, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. This is the third piece of legislation related to the Smith annexation, located Fenner Road at Wilson Road, first reading.
Move to suspend. Second.
Motion to suspend, Mr. Schilling, second by Mr. Phillips. Mrs. Knight, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Motion to adopt?
Second.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Whidden, seconded by Mr. Schilling. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Thank you. Mrs. Knight, would you please read Resolution R 11, 2025?
Resolution number R11, 2025. Resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to enter into an agreement with Premier Health Partners related to the city providing emergency medical services to the Upper Valley Medical Center campus, and to enter into a donation agreement with Upper Valley Medical Center to accept a grant for a Sprinter ambulance van and declaring an emergency. This is the first reading.
Move to suspend.
Second.
Motion to suspend by Mr. Sievert, seconded by Mr. Twist. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes. Move to adopt.
Second.
Motion to adopt by Mr. Twist, seconded by Mr. Sievert. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Whidden?
Yes.
Mr. Sievert?
Yes.
Mrs. Westfall?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mrs. Marshall?
Yes.
Mr. Schilling?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Thank you. Mrs. Knight, could you read our last resolution for the evening? Resolution R 12, 2025.
Resolution number R12, 2025, resolution approving the application of Scherre H. Mumpower for renewal of farmland in an agricultural district. This is the first reading, but this will also be the subject of a committee meeting next Monday. First reading,
Tuesday? Monday?
next Monday.
24th?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. We do have no ordinances, so we will move to communications and announcements.
Just,
Are there any?
usual reminder, filing of financial disclosure statements. That's all.
All righty. Mayor?
Just a huge shout out and thank you to city staff that worked many, many hours in a row to take care of these water main breaks. Frigid temperatures are playing havoc with the ground and freezing and thawing, but we're on the opposite side of that. So we're just very thankful for those guys that spent a lot of time out there working on that. A lot of expertise out there. Thank you.
Mr. Titterton, Director of Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you'll indulge me, I've got several items today. I'll start on a lighter note. We do not have any pending office closures, so trash and recycle will be on time for the foreseeable future. Mr. Schilling, we did pass out an update on the store. Got that today and want to make sure that you had that distributed. I don't think there were any surprises in it, but if you need any follow-up, please let us know. That goes for anybody. I'm looking at Mr. Schilling, but and of course anybody. Okay. I do want to remind folks that we do have 3 committee of the whole meetings coming up in the next couple of weeks, starting tomorrow night. All 3 of them will be at 6 o'clock here in the council chambers. Tomorrow night we will have one to discuss utility master planning. On the 24th we will have a presentation by our landscape architecture firm that has got some recommendations regarding Prouty Plaza upgrades to landscape, hardscape, that kind of thing that will need input from council. So if at all possible, if you could be there, we will have a presentation on that. That's important because it then informs the meeting on March 10th, which will be a schematic design recommendation on the overall streetscape project. Again, those 3 are starting at 6 o'clock here in the building. I want to take a couple minutes and just kind of let you know what transpired on Friday and Saturday relating to the water break. Just to give you a background on the timeline, at approximately 1:30 in the afternoon, staff out at the water treatment plant discovered that there was what would be considered a major break right out in front of the plant. They noticed it because, you know, they're observant and they saw it, but also just a note so you understand why we spend money that we do and you approve that money. Our SCADA system does monitor our tank levels as well as all the pressures coming out of the plant and into the system, and noticed a drastic, I think they got an audible alarm that there was a big drop in pressure, and so that's how we discovered that there was this major break. The question was asked, you know, if we had the SCADA, we have the computer system, could we isolate what line it was and focus in immediately on, you know, where the leak was and understand how to close the valves? And it's not that simple, which I think you'll see, or maybe you'll understand. There are several outflows, several pipes, 12 inches or more in diameter, that leave the plant approximately at the same location. They feed all of the 4 tanks, and they're all in the same general, maybe half a football field, square footage wise, in front of the plant. There's a butterfly valve system in place. Don't ask me the details. We can certainly get you that minutia if you'd like it. But nonetheless, with that kind of pressure coming out of the plant, and with multiple pipes coming through, It was very hard, impossible to know which pipe it was immediately until that leak could be shut off. We have hundreds of valves in the whole system, throughout the whole system, and anytime that we have a minor or a major break, we close the valves to shut the leak, isolate the leak so that we don't depressurize the system. And that's relevant as it relates to whether or not to call a boil advisory. The staff, and it's not as I mentioned this morning during our debrief, it's not as simple as if you know where the shutoff valve is typically behind your toilet, where you're just turning it from vertical to horizontal. There is a process. You have to go to each valve. You have to exercise it. You have to then close it. Then you have to check and make sure that it actually shut the leak off. That didn't happen for 13 valves as we radiated out. As the staff radiated out from the actual site of the leak. It wasn't until approximately 9:30 at night when we finally found the valve, which was located at Community Park. Now the line that we were pretty sure it was in because it was affecting the high service area, was coming out of the plant a 12-inch line. If you know your streets at Michigan Avenue, which is in that general area, the line was upsized to a 16-inch line, and it goes out to Community Park. So when the valve was shut off, the leak stopped immediately, which was a good thing, but at the same time, it shut off all the water service to 7,500 people northeast of the river. As much of an inconvenience as that was, all the water that then was to that point that had been pressurized into the residents and businesses on the northeast of the river all started backflowing back to the plant. And so at, let's see, after 9:30 until about 12:30, staff used 3 pumps at the site of the leak to just get the water out of there. So it took 3 hours just to get all that water out of the hole so that we could actually start attacking the leak. By 3:15 in the morning, the leak was fixed, the water was turned back on, and the tank started filling, and I'll come back to the tank. Crews then spent from 3:15 in the morning until late in the afternoon and Saturday around town, opening hydrants, flushing the hydrants, flushing the air out of everybody's systems, as well as any of the sediment and the dirt or sediment that was stirred, silt that was stirred in the system, so that it didn't. It did, but to minimize the amount that came out of your faucet if you were on the northeast side, as several of us are. At 6:30, so once that was done, at approximately 6:30 in the evening, we were able to, staff took 54 samples throughout the city. The process is that you take the samples and then you incubate those samples, and they have to sit for 24 hours at minimum, during which time if they notice any kind of growth that's going on, then they know that there is a potential contamination issue. And so then you have to wait another 24 hours. And that's relevant because of the boil advisory that we issued. The boil advisory was a tough call. At 6:30 is when we called the boil advisory. At that time, we limited the boil advisory to the northeast section, northeast of the river, because that was the only area that had depressurized to 20 psi, which is the trigger point for when you have to have a boil advisory. We debated whether or not to expand the boil advisory because the rest of the city had not depressurized to that point. However, going back to my comment about the tank, the primary tank that feeds the high service area is the newest tank that we have out on Stanfield. That was the one that immediately, when the leak occurred, started dropping in pressure. Weren't sure why that was happening, but it wasn't filling, and it was trying to drop and empty, and so using the SCADA and the control systems at the treatment plant, they shut off the direct feed to that tank and rerouted around using the extra high service tank to try to keep up the level in that tank so that the pressure stayed above of 20. Now, this is all happening on a Friday. People are getting home. They're using their water for dinner and what have you. It's also Valentine's, the restaurants, Valentine's Day. The restaurants are busy. It's just there's at that point a lot of water demand, and so we were watching very closely the levels in that tank, and they would drop a little bit, and then they would stabilize, and then they might go up a little bit, and so it was just at that area where it was very tough to call. At some point, though, our water treatment plant superintendent, Gary, he and the staff, the rest of the staff were concerned to the point where they weren't sure if it was going to get to that 20, and so that's when we changed to an all community, all city boil advisory. There are some questions about our communications and our communication strategy. We did follow our normal communications strategy. WHIO, they were out on site the whole, I guess until about 6:30. So when this first happened, they're all monitoring, and somebody was local enough. They came up and they were there, and they were very patient. They stayed out of our way. And so, they had wanted to talk to somebody, and so Jill went out and talked to them at approximately 6 o'clock. At the same time as we were issuing the boil advisory, I verified that it was in the sent file. It says it got sent at 6:30. Somewhere along the way, it did not get where it was supposed to be. And so that part of the communication strategy did not follow. We did not follow that through. Hate to blame it on a computer or technology, because that's kind of the old, excuse. But I have no reason to believe that that's not what happened. The staff knows how to use the technology and did verify that it was sent at that time. Nonetheless, while there was some confusion about the boil advisory, that's at the same time that we were evaluating whether or not to expand the boil advisory. So whether you consider that a silver lining or not, the fact that we did not issue the limited boil advisory and immediately went to, the first boil advisory was a community-wide one, may have minimized or at least lessened any of the confusion, because anytime there's a boil advisory, people have a lot of questions about it, and we know that. But from that point on, we did maintain as much communication whenever we had new information. We not only dated it, but we basically time-stamped it so people knew the progress that we were making. Just a reminder to you all of what kind of notification process we go through on any of these. We call all of our high-volume users. We had some industrial manufacturing businesses such as Peak and ConAgra, high water users, obviously concerned about a boil advisory. I believe that at least one of them was in cleanup and maintenance mode, so their cleanup folks called and asked what they should do, and we advised them of that. There were other industries involved as well. We called the schools because we weren't sure if they were going to have activities over the weekend. Turned out they had a tournament going on. We did talk to West Milton. We talked to Miami County. We talked to Hobart Arena because they had the home show going on all weekend. Not sure what disturbance that might be. We had a conversation with the Miami or Public Health of Miami County. And they did their own notification because they wanted to, they obviously have a concern about the restaurants and the bars, and especially when it relates to cleanup and sanitation and water pressure. As we always do, we posted it on our website, Facebook, and other social media. We do have an email notification system as well as text notifications through our website. And then the public release or the press release out to our news media. There's a question about using like a one call now. I guess that doesn't exist anymore, but Code Red. We had used that in the past. However, we had not continued that service several years ago. We've found that it's not very effective. That over time, I guess people have gotten desensitized to that, and so it was less effective. People with telemarketers and the kind of robocalls that you get more and more, and we weren't using it that much anyway, but they would not be answering the phone. They'd let it go to voicemail, and then when they saw it was from the city, they would call us and individually, and then our phones would get slammed, and very, very inefficient, and it just didn't work. And then the other thing was that was a registry program, and so it depended on subscribers, free subscribers, actually opting in with their phone numbers, and those were not being updated. People would leave town, or maybe they registered a landline, and as time has gone on, nobody's got a landline. We have a landline, but we're a relic.
Hey,
But I know some people still have them, but most use cell phones and
Deals with all the junk
weren't being
calls.
recorded. So, the 911 system does have something similar to that. It is used for public safety emergencies such as Amber Alerts. We're looking into that, but we want to explore that because we don't want to dilute the effectiveness of that system. But there may, as part of our after action, we're going to be looking into that and see if that might be an effective way. Overall, the staff did a very, very good job. They were very coordinated, calm. They were professional throughout the whole event. They followed all the protocols and the EPA guidance. And when I say staff, I should call them out and commend them, and I hope you'd agree. From city engineer Jill Rhodes, assistant engineer Christy Butera, Gary Evans. I mentioned Gary before. He's our water treatment plant superintendent. I believe he came and got introduced when he first got hired. Scott Taylor is the utility foreman. He's not past tense. He's still here. Yeah. He was instrumental in this. I didn't get a head count on the number of staff that were here, but we did have our full utility staff. We had a few street workers, street maintenance workers that were here. Our retired, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but I will anyway. Our retired utility foreman came in. He was his history of the system from both he worked in the plant as well as in the utility department distribution system, and so his knowledge was key to helping us get this resolved as quickly as possible. We don't typically, and we're not going to really start doing this, but we did have a couple of follow-up minor breaks in water mains, and we wanted to push that out over the weekend as they were occurring because, we figured there'd be people that would ask questions if one was related to the other. Turns out that they really weren't, but I mentioned the timeline on the major break and how it took basically, half a day or more to resolve. The staff had to replace 6 feet of 12-inch line. In this case, typically on normal main breaks, you don't replace any line, you just couple it and you just, you sleeve it and everything is good. In this case, of course, it took several hours, 6 feet of pipe. When the pipe, the split, it was a radial split. That's as technical as I can get for you. But it was a 6 foot wide section, and when the hole was opened, because of the pressure of the line, there was absolutely no fill in the line. It was just a hole. I mean, it had all gotten blown out, and they had to take it all away. So if you haven't been out there, it's a pretty big area. It is all backfilled, and the road is open. I have not driven it since it's been patched up. But last thing I'll say on that topic is that we did follow all the protocols. We had constant contact with the EPA, and the EPA's comment was that they were what I was told is the EPA, in their comments, were very impressed with their level of response and the handling of the incident. It is never a bad thing to get compliments from the EPA. Another question that we received, since at least 7,500 people were without water, that they were, EPA has a protocol, and they were prepped and called us on Saturday morning to check in because they do not allow more than 24 hours to go by without people having water, and they do have a mobile unit, and so they were ready to prep that and bring that out in the event that that the water shutoff went longer than 24 hours. So, a lot of that is part of the sausage making, if you will, that people don't see, but it is something that went as well as could be expected in an event that hopefully is not going to happen for, I don't know, forever. Any questions about that one?
I just got a couple questions on our notification process. The big business, when you got to Miami County, they contact all the restaurants, or did we contact anybody, like Redberry and those people out in the north end, or you just let the health department do that?
So they got the regular notifications from us. We directly contact, as part of our protocols, the high volume users, okay? We knew we were having conversations with health, and we knew that their staff was out there. We did verify from some of the food services that they had been out there. We may have gotten a call or two just to clarify what they were being told. But we were working with Miami County Health, and we knew that they were out at every one of them because they have that database and they have that list.
Okay. Another one was, do we ever try to, or is it possible to use the county's EMA system, since we don't have call one anymore and everybody's not the dinosaur that I am, to deal with the solicitors?
That is they're part of that 911 system that I mentioned.
Okay.
That we're looking at again.
Okay.
I have a question.
Mrs. Westfall?
Did any of the tests test positive for any organisms?
Not at all.
Good.
Not one. That's why, we were telling people that the earliest would be Monday, that it was possible it was going to go to Monday because 24 hours was Sunday night, but they monitored the samples throughout that whole first 24 hours and didn't see any change in it at all. So as soon as they were allowed to, and they all showed clear. And this is 54 samples too, and it just never know. We lifted it. Gary's a class 4. He's a class guy, but he's a class 4 treatment plant, which is the highest level that you can get. I joke that maybe we can give him an honorary class 5, but he is a class 4, so we're lucky to have him.
Thank you.
I do have one other thing. Somebody called me and sent me, we didn't send any letters per se out or drop anything off at houses or anything, did we? Physically?
No, not on a community-wide one, no.
Because I don't know whether they printed, but the neighbor called and said the neighbor got this, nobody else on the block got it. So I don't know whether they printed it off the system, but it's on letterhead and everything else, so they might have got
That could have been a printout of the press release that was actually
Okay.
one of the press releases that was sent.
But we wouldn't have sent that to House A and not sent it to
No, we
the
had
neighbors.
we had a debrief this morning, and Jill reminded me of one that we had not too long ago, but it was an isolated one. But in that case, we did hand carry to 600 households, because it was I say isolated, it's still 600, and we did go door to door on that one, but it was a matter of timing and the size of it, and in a community-wide one. And the other thing I will note is that
Well, this was out in the area that was affected. It wasn't.
in Northeast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure who would have sent that, but we did not.
Okay.
Or walked that around. I will say that there was some confusion about West Milton and Miami County. So I just want everybody to know, we didn't ignore them. First of all, we talked to Miami County and West Milton. Miami County and West Milton are their own water systems. So they are responsible. They make the decision as to whether or not they would issue a boil advisory for their customers. And they can call a boil advisory as a precautionary matter. They're required to call a boil advisory for anything when it drops under 20 psi. We would not ever call a boil advisory for those, even though we supply them the raw water, because that's not our place, it's not our system, we don't dictate that to them. I know that West Milton, I believe it was a precautionary measure, they did issue a boil advisory for their customers. Miami County decided not to. I didn't. I do want to call out Michael Clary, the administrator of the county. He did call me a couple of times on Friday night and just to check in, see if we needed any help, which I greatly appreciated. But again, those were their decisions, and we would not have any. We could talk. We did talk to them about the decisions we were making and why, but beyond that, the call would have been theirs.
Any other questions? Mr. Whidden? Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Snee.
That's fine. You mentioned that there was an opt-in option on the website for people to get notifications for emergency alerts, but that is something that a person would need to sign up for.
They do,
Yes.
yes.
And if they were on that list, did they receive an alert?
They would have gotten an email. The texting we've been looking into. The texting has a maximum number, which we've never gotten more than like 25% towards, and then suddenly we got to 100%. We are, as I mentioned during the budget process, we are looking at, it's time to revisit the website and update that, or even, go to a different website. And so that'll be one of the things that we will include on that.
That was her water alert a couple
That
days
was,
ago.
that was that notification.
She signed up this morning.
I will say people were getting those. Some people had to delete what they had signed up for whenever, a long time ago. We just had them refresh, delete, reselect, and they were getting the notices.
Anything else on that
Any
one?
other questions? Mr. Whidden?
Yeah. I want to go back to this, I don't know. Quickly, do we have a definitive cause of the break? Is this the freeze-thaw cycle that we're attributing?
Yeah, there was nothing unusual. Well, I guess it was unusual, but no, it was the, age of the pipe, the freeze-thaw, the frost. Frost plays a big part of it when it gets down, and then it, typically when it starts thawing is when it starts heaving, and there was some shifting. And once you shift a pipe like that, it's typically under, here's some geek minutia for you. At your house, depending on where you're at in the system, you could have pressure of anywhere from 60 to 70 psi. When it comes out of the plant, it's coming out at about 90 to 95. So it's right in front of the plant. It's coming out, and so if you get any kind of shifting of any degree, and then once it shifts, once it bursts, then the pressure from the leak starts voiding out the fill that's keeping the pipe in place, then you're going to see even more. We were concerned that shifting and that movement might affect one or a couple of the other pipes that are in there. For example, the low pressure system, which doesn't have anything to do with the actual pressure. I don't know why they named them this, but the low pressure is the one that serves the downtown area down towards Walgreens and that area there. It's a smaller area, totally unrelated to this. Didn't lose much pressure, but that was a risk.
Okay. And then, in one of the posts that the mayor was posting late to the night, by the way, thank you for those, she had mentioned that the valve that you were talking about earlier was found in Community Park. I understand why the mayor didn't know it was there, but I just want to make sure we knew it was there. That it wasn't like a lost and found trial and error. We have a map of where all the valves are. It sounded like it was a surprise to the mayor, but I understand why you don't know where it is. But someone at the water department knew that.
What was a surprise to us all was that it was all the way out there that valve shut the actual leak off, that we had to go a mile away to shut it off. That valve, yes, we did definitely know. That was a valve that was put in as part of a capital project 2-3 years ago, maybe a little longer than that. If you recall, the city of Dayton had a very major water main break, and it was under Miami, the Great Miami River, and they, could not even find where the leak was, because, how do you drain the river? And don't say remove a low dam, because we don't need to go there. So as a result of that, knowing that we have some cross connections in the river, we did some redirecting and some redundancy, and that was a valve that we put in place out there. Yeah.
That's all I have.
Anyone else?
I wasn't here. I don't know.
You stay or you know what's going on?
So the other, I'm not done yet.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I told you it was going to be a while. And so if that wasn't bad enough, then of
thought
course
you didn't
Mother
have
Nature, Sunday, decided to give us a little bit of snow. And it wasn't really that much snow, but it was a snow that had followed rain most of the afternoon and evening the night before. And so that snow was snow, and under it was kind of a slushy ice. knowing that, if you look at 4 or 5 different weather forecasts, a lot of times you get 4 or 5 different forecasts. In this case, they were all and have all said very accurately that the temperature was going to drop like a rock. If you were up this morning, you didn't even hit the double digits in the temperature until sometime this afternoon. So with that in mind, knowing that and it's 7 o'clock in the morning on Sunday morning, it was still snowing, knowing that we had another half an inch that we figured we'd get by 11 o'clock before it stopped. So we did call folks out. Normally, we would have only treated probably with salt the mains and secondaries, although, as I've said many times before, each event is a unique event, and the policy that we have on the website is there just as a general guideline. And so instead, we did have 8 drivers out doing the mains and secondaries. At the same time, though, we did call for 12 more drivers to do the local roads. Some of the staff that worked on the water main break did come back in and do the plowing, the winter treatment. They did get a good night's sleep, they said, so nobody was sleep deprived. We made sure of that. We made sure that they had a rest. But I did want to reiterate and remind folks that the guideline that we follow and the protocols that we follow are that our police department, our boots on the ground, if you will, are in the cars. We hope they're not having to get out of the cars in that weather. Sometimes they do, but they're our immediate assessment. They call 911. 911 calls our street foreman. He comes out, he inspects. The PD folks, they're very good at understanding at least minimally what might need to be done. If they feel the roads are good, but the bridges, which are the first ones to get icy, start being a hazard, then our street foreman knows what to assess first. He then calls me. Could be 10 o'clock at night, could be 3 o'clock in the morning. It's a joy. But and then we discuss what kind of an attack we need to make. In this particular case, I talked to him at about 7 o'clock in the morning as he was texting me to say he had just been out. And then we actually, at that point, he was thinking that we would just treat the mains and secondaries and then assess the local roads after that, which many communities, including us, we typically will do that. Knowing that the weather was going to drop, whether it was going to get freezing, and that if we did not get on the local roads like at the same time, that we might get too far behind and end up with ice rinks all over town. That's when I decided that we need to bring everybody in immediately. Last thing I'll say on that, I did ask staff to give me a comparison. So every 2 weeks during the winter season, I'm sure you guys pore over it in your items of interest. You get a nice detailed spreadsheet that shows the salt and the labor and the beet juice and everything else and overtime and everything that we do. I had them do a comparison year to date and also all of last year compared to year to date, because there's really not that much different. I didn't realize what a nice winter we had last year. We've had several events this year. Last year at this time, we were in our second to last event for the entire season. Our winter treatment season was over by February 24th of last year. So, you know, God willing, you know, maybe we have 6 more days of winter left. I'm not holding my breath on that one. But year to date, this year compared to last year, we're up 77% in salt usage, just about double. We've spent about the same amount on salt difference. Our labor hours were up 200%, as well as our costs for that labor. We've spent almost $12,400 this year versus less than $4,000 last year. Overtime, we've had almost a 700% increase in overtime hours this year. We do have the budget for this, so I'm not sweating that. Total salt labor and all of our costs, we're at just over $75,000 as opposed to less than 25. So we've spent 3 times as much. We've had almost 3 times the number of salting events. We've plowed 6 times versus 2 times, so 3 times as many plowing events, and we've actually brined 1 time less this year than we have last year. As I mentioned, we only had 1 more event after this one last year, so when we compare all of last year to this year, they're just about the same numbers. But we are up significantly, and so as I mentioned, my point there, more than anything else, is that, you know, every year is different, every event is different, and we just, you know, take it each event, evaluate it individually, and then attack it as we see fit. So that's all I have.
Okay.
I think.
Director of Law.
I have no comments this evening.
All righty. Kudos to the plow people, because they got everything, at least in our west end of town, pretty much done in the middle of the afternoon, which is great. Thank you for your long summary and synopsis of what went on from Friday to Sunday. That's about all I have to say, other than we have a committee as a whole meeting tomorrow for future looking. Mr. Twist.
I would just say thanks to staff, the ditto, for both the snow plowing and the water main break. Definitely appreciate all of them very much. So,
Mr. Phillips.
Just in relation to the snow events and another thing, the difference that weather makes is astronomical, and how it affects the roads with ice and no ice and thawing and et cetera. But one of the worst things that I've noticed, especially in the social media aspect, which I refer to romantically as the sewer of communication, and the misinformation that gets set out there by people assuming, and you know what you get when you assume, and it just stirs folks to make comments that are really not kind. They're not good for the community at large, and they don't bother to call anybody here. We have 9 representatives sitting at this desk that are elected, and I got 1 phone call from a person about the water break itself, and it concerns me that people take to this type of discourse that is not helpful for anyone. And I would encourage folks to reach out, ask questions, and get real information instead of assumptions and aspersions, which are not good for anybody. So I just throw that out there.
I think we've gotten such a mode to, you do the work that I should be doing to find the information. And that's what leads to a lot of the comments. So if they would just call the source.
That's it.
I actually got 3 calls. One guy called a neighbor, but he'd already called the water department. He was just checking on pressure in different areas of town, and he already knew what was going on, because they did a very good job of explaining what was going on. And so, I mean, he's not complaining, he's just checking. But yeah, there was a lot of
But kudos to our city staff that
Yes.
at all levels, I mean, fantastic jobs. And I've worked in weather conditions, not quite as bad as these, but bad weather conditions, and it's horrible out there for them, and it makes the work so much more difficult and hazardous. So kudos to all of our staff. I mean, from the guys in the ditch to the guys doing traffic, you know, it's everything.
Yep.
So thank you.
Mr. Whitten.
I'm sorry, I did have one last question for Mr. Titterington. You'd mentioned briefly in your statement that you're gonna do like a follow-up. Was that a official postmortem or just a more generalized in-house follow-up?
A debrief?
Yeah.
We do that with every incident that like this that occurs. So the staff got together. We had everybody that was involved. You know, Charlotte and I, Jill, Christy, Scott, Gary, Matt from the fire department, since fire service could have been affected or was affected, and they had to come up with a alternative plan, especially in the northeast part of town. And we just talked through, you know, what worked, what we could have done better. Just, you know, Monday morning quarterbacking.
But that's like, you don't have like an official document you're waiting to put out. That's kind of more.
We don't. They're just notes for ourselves to, you know, to document for the next time. Yeah.
That's all.
Mrs. Marshall.
Just like everybody else, thank you to all the workers for their hard work and their time. It was very much appreciated. I do have a question about the water, but it has nothing to do with the break. Somebody had reached out to me before that about the fluoride, the level of fluoride. Do you happen to know what that is or where they could find that information? I don't know where to send them for that.
It should be, don't quote me on this, I'll get back to you on it, but that should be documented in our annual consumer confidence report that we're required to file, which would be online in the water department webpage. We do not treat our system with fluoride, but there is a level of natural occurring fluoride in our system.
Perfect. That's it.
Mr. Schilling.
I'd just like to thank Mr. Titterington and Chief McKinney for getting this report to me. I know it was, as I said, it was probably in the system working its way through, but they rushed it, and I do really appreciate that, and I have some other comments later on about that. Thank you so much.
Mrs. Westfall.
I just want to reiterate that I'm thankful for all the hard work that was done this weekend, and I appreciate the detailed explanation.
Mrs. Snee.
Would certainly echo those comments. Unbelievable level of effort from all of our employees, and I do appreciate the communication that we got during the event.
Mr. Sievert.
Thank you. I likewise would echo the sentiment. As a matter of fact, as we stood here, I wrote a couple notes. I think in my 15 years of varying time serving on council, that was the most thorough and informative communication that we've received from a safety service director that I can recall. And I do appreciate that in the recognition of things that you could do better and things that went well. And I think the community and the inquiring minds would like to know that explanation, and I appreciate you for providing that to the people. Similarly, I want to thank Mr. Kerber. There was, prior to the water main break, a little bit of a dust up on social media concerning compact cars and having an appropriate definition for a compact car on our parking spots. And I did communicate with Mr. Kerber, and he indicates that they are working on some further definitions so that issue can be communicated more effectively for people so they can understand what is actually defined as a compact car. Thirdly, I wrote a note. I understand there's going to be some, I think you said 3 committees of the whole. One thing that I would ask, if it's possible, if we can, I don't know how you could set it up, but if we could set it up a little bit better, because everyone from Mr. Whitten over to me, if you're going to use the screen, we're not going to be able to see it. So I don't know if we can put spots or.
We are. We're going to reserve spots in the front so
Okay.
that you can sit and look that way.
Appreciate that. And then for the good of the order, I would note for Valentine's Day that Redmond's, Dunaways, Herons, Mayflower, and maybe somebody else all had live music over the weekend. And for a person who grew up in Troy to see that kind of, I guess, excitement and talent to be in our downtown, I thought that was pretty cool. So that's all I have today.
All righty. Staff, any comments? That brings us to the public. Anyone from the public wants to come up and have their say? Same procedures, name and address.
Good evening. My name is Deb Hogshead. I live at 421 South Plum Street here in Troy, and I'd like to make a statement to my fellow citizens and residents of Troy. I last spoke here on January 21, the 15th anniversary of the Citizens United decision, and the day after the presidential inauguration. Since then, I've seen two very significant things happen. First, I've seen how $288 million can buy a seat in the White House and a platform to speak from the Oval Office, making that person's voice louder than ours. Second, I've seen the We the People Amendment get reintroduced in Congress as House Joint Resolution 54. The proposed amendment requires the regulation of campaign spending and makes clear a corporation is not a person with inherent, inalienable constitutional rights. The first clearly demonstrates why we need the second. Since January 20, we've been watching as Elon Musk, an unaccountable, unelected billionaire, sows chaos as he and his team work to dismantle the federal government. I, for one, am concerned about the security of my personal information. I know the damage that occurs when sensitive data gets into the wrong hands. Last summer, my husband's debit card number was stolen and used to pay the Verizon bills of 3 unnamed parties to the tune of $2,300. As a retiree, I'm concerned about whether I'll be able to depend on Social Security and Medicare benefits. As a small investor, I'm concerned about being scammed. Who will be in my corner if the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau is indeed deleted? And I know I have neighbors near and far who stand to lose a lot more than me. According to the 2020 census, 11% of Troy residents live in poverty. They may lose critical safety nets, Medicaid, Meals on Wheels, Head Start, and our region's small family farmers and ranchers are likely to suffer in multiple ways, as are people around the globe who depend on food assistance. The federal government certainly needs fixing, but not through reckless abandon and not by Musk. What he has been doing is unprecedented. He's been directing decisions that aren't his to make, and you can bet your bottom dollar that he, his corporations, and his billionaire and multimillionaire friends will profit handsomely from subsequent changes at the expense of the rest of us, regardless of our political affiliations. What we're seeing is the replacement of our democratic republic with an oligarchy. This is not who we are as a nation, and this is wrong. To my fellow citizens here in Troy, if you agree that what is happening is wrong, call Representative Davidson if you live in District 8, Representative Carey if you live in District 15, and our Senators Marino and Husted. Remind them of their oath of office and their duty as members of the legislative branch to be a check on the executive branch. The executive branch, which, by the way, has recently suggested it is above the law and immune to checks by the judicial branch. While you're at it, encourage Representatives Davidson and Carey to co-sponsor House Joint Resolution 54, the We the People Amendment, and urge Senators Marino and Husted to co-sponsor the companion resolution when it's introduced in the Senate. And if you haven't already done so, go to movetoamend.org/motion to sign the petition to get big money out of politics and end corporate rule. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hello, my name is Annie Shoemaker, and I live at 263 Elmwood Avenue here in Troy. I wanted to talk about bringing chickens to city limits, backyard chickens, basically. I know everyone smiles. I think it would be great for the city. I understand that everybody has their concerns. Obviously, there would be limits. You can't have a backyard full of chickens, even though I would love to. Obviously, no roosters. Respect your neighbors. Clean up after them. If you do your research, you'll find that there are chicken breeds that are quieter than others, that don't make a lot of noise. I just think it would be a great way to help out our neighbors who are struggling. My husband and I, we started a very large garden in our backyard years ago, and I never thought I would have had so many neighbors come and say, hey, can I have a tomato? Or, hey, do you have any extra plants that I can plant? And even my kids, I have teenagers, and when they're teenagers, all their friends come to the house. They make homemade pizzas with what we've pickled from our garden, our banana peppers. I've never seen teenagers fight over pickled banana peppers before. I just think it would be, like I said, great for our community, and I'd like to everybody consider having that and be respectful, obviously.
Bobby?
What was your address again? I'm sorry.
263 Elmwood Avenue.
I'm sorry, what?
Elmwood?
263, yeah.
Elmwood, okay.
Elmwood. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
we will follow up with Ms. Shoemaker about her request, which we will send to the Planning Commission,
Okay.
since it's a zoning matter.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Sievert has one more comment.
Thank you. We forgot to say this, all three of us. March 22nd is the at-large meeting at 9 a.m. at the Halifax Community Room Building, whatever you want to call it, 100 Nottingham.
Clubhouse.
Clubhouse, that's it, thank you. 100 Nottingham Road, I think is the address. So if you could meet us there, we would like to continue some of these dialogues. Thank you.
Isn't the entrance off of Finsbury?
I don't know the answer
I
to
don't
that.
think you can get there from Finsbury.
I think it's,
You can only get there from Finsbury.
Yeah, because it's a little short road that.
Other than the walking.
They next. So,
Or you can walk, you're
Yeah.
right, from Halifax Villas.
Okay.
2 days before the second public hearing of, or committee as a whole meeting. With that, anything else? We are adjourned till tomorrow at 6 p.m. for the committee as a whole on future water and sewer.